Okay, so we are going to do lab 8. I had a little bit of issue with testing some of the things I want to implement it for this lab. And then as soon as the class time was over, I was able to clean up some stuff. So we're going to do that today. And this reflects the last lesson that we had, which we talked about how SE Linux or mandatory access control can be implemented for application security. I was not able to apply the SE Linux portion because there was a lot of troubleshooting happening, and I didn't want to implement 10 steps to do one thing. So down the line, I'll revisit to see if there's something that we can implement for that. But it's because of the version of Linux we're using. But if you use like SE Linux with Red Hat or other releases, it is a little bit different and easier to implement. Okay, so we are going to download Kali Linux virtual machine from the website. We want to get the regular one, not the weekly one. And then once you download, make sure you save it into your downloads folder. Or make sure if it's Edge, you have to click Save As. If it's Chrome, it's going to pop up on Downloads. Then we're going to right click, and then we're going to use 7-zip to extract. So show more options, 7-zip, and extract files. Once that take place, you're going to have the extracted folder where you can open the subfolder and then double click the blue file to load it into VirtualBox playlist. So if you want to speed things up, we can change the settings to 8,000 for megabyte for RAM, and you can up the processor to 4-core before you start it. Okay. Once you start it, it's going to gray out like this and you can't change it. So once I'm happy with all my settings, I click OK and then click Start. So log into Kali Linux using Kali. And then you are going to use the terminal. So as always, the first thing we're going to do is going to be update. And while we're doing that, we kind of need to read a little bit about Apparmor. I like this application actually. I think that it is easy to implement. So the purpose of this particular lab is to install our Apparmor, let's say on that system, and we want to monitor that system to see if there are rules that that system violates, like running an application where it shouldn't have, right? Like last week we talked about that. We want to control the mobile devices where they cannot install the application or run the application that we don't permit, we do not permit. So Apparmor is really good for that. It also protects your OS and application from threats. It basically the police of your system, so it's going to enforce and making sure that your system is following the rules and behaving. And if you want more information about Apparmor, you can click the link. It takes you through the installation process. I had to dissect this a little bit. I wanted to make it, yeah, if you run it as the instruction, it works, but I wanted to apply it where you are loading a web application and then see how that works, right? Whether it's gonna see it as a violation of the policy or not. So So here it tells you that you can use it on Debian, which is what we're using, Ubuntu or OpenSUSE. And then, so when you read their documentation, you can go through and it gives you some example. And then we can also run, like logging kind of requirement. Okay. So that gives you a little bit about the application itself. And so when you are using Apparmor, it really enforces what we call the mandatory access control model compared to what you see in a lot of systems, which is discretionary access control. So discretionary is like when you give people permission to read or save file, that's discretionary because you create the file, so you have the discretion to allow or not allow, right? But in the mandatory access control, it is going to be what is mandated, what is set, and you don't have the discretion to allow or disallow. Okay. So this is why what you see is it is a better or a better security element for us to implement Apparmor for the system. Okay. And they've been around since 2009. So after we logged into Kali Linux, we opened up our terminal and we would run updates. So sudo app update, you always want to start here. And then we type in our password. So once that happens, what we're going to do is we are going to enable the Linux kernel command in the bootloader. This is going to implement the Linux security modules from the application. I feel like this is a better approach. You can do without this, but it's really intended for you to utilize the Linux kernel command line in the bootloader anyways. And when you learn about Linux OS, like in CIS41 or another class, you learn that the bootloader for Linux is going to be grub. And so what we're doing here is we are making a folder, right, that will be for grub.d. And in that, we are going to append, right, this string, which allows you to have the proper command. So it's going to activate Apparmor module for the kernel. See? So it's a command line default. So it's going to set this into the grub. And then with that, we are going to pipe. So we're going to add an additional command for us to set up the configuration for the Apparmor for grub. Then once you modify it, you're going to update it. And then when you update grub, of course, we have to reboot. Okay. So that's what these commands are made to do. So, and you can copy and paste, so you can type if you wish. So I'm here, let me close this pane so I have more room on the left. And then I would pull this down. So the next step I'm going to do is step 14. And like I said, we're going to work with, so you're going to do, and I try to separate the commands so that way you don't get confused on which is which and which is together. So I'm going to do a sudo make dir here, right, which is to create a folder or a directory for it. And for my grub.d, now my grub.d, then I'm going to issue the next command, and this is together, right? These 3 lines are together. You're going to pipe that. And then we're going to do a sudo update grub. So we're gonna copy this and execute that for the update for the grub that we just modified. And then we're going to reboot. So far what we did was we just making sure that we modify the bootloader for Linux, and we are going to activate the application module for that bootloader so it would work directly with the Linux kernel command, because that's the best way to use it, right? That's really how it's intended to be used. And once we reboot, we're gonna relog back in. And we want to check the status of our, there's several ways that you can do this, but the command that we're using here is we're going to use a cat command, so that way we can access, right, the directory and the subdirectory for Apparmor, and we wanted to see if it's enabled. So we're going to do a cat. And once you have that, then you can also pull the status. So open up the terminal. And we're going to use the cat command. So it tells me, yes, it is enabled, right? Then we are going to check out the profile, right, for the application. So Apparmor uses these profile. Enforce, that means that it applies the rules. Complaints, that means it's gonna notify when the rules are violated. And then unconfined, that means that nothing is applied or the rules are not defined. So we're going to, and you can go to their documentation to read more about it. So we're gonna do a sudo a status. And we need to input Kelly password. And once you type everything correctly for the password, it's gonna tell you that it loaded the module. Remember that earlier we activate that module for the Linux kernel. So now, after we check that it is enabled, we're gonna load the module. Okay, so that's the next step. So at this point, you can screenshot showing Apparmor module is loaded. Then what we can do is we can check to see how many executables are running, right? All applications use some form of executable. And when you're using the PS command, that simply is a command to list the processes. As tasks is being executables is going to require processing tasks. So what you're going to do is you are going to use the PS. And what we want to do is we want to do a grep v. That means that we want to filter, right, for unconfined. So it's typical that we see this. Why? There's nothing really running on my system, right? If you have running processes, it's going to list that here. So because right now I'm only using the command line. There's no other things that are unconfined that it could find. So it's gonna give me like an empty list like this. So no, right? No for 17. Then what we're gonna do is we are going to check overall if there are any kind of profiles for our Apparmor. So we're gonna do a list command, or an ls. And there are some, so here, right, it tells me that there are some profiles. So you got some NVIDIA things here, right? There are some profiles that are listed. Your USRP, the IP section, stroke, and others. So now what we're gonna do is we can add more profiles to this list. Okay. But we're gonna download it. So whenever you do this, it's going to pull the packages and download that for you using wget. And so it's able to get the extra profiles. Then what we're gonna do is we are going to have, so Apparmor is there, but it's for the basis, we want to have more utility to be added, right? And the utility is going to allow us to have more feature for that particular application control. So we're gonna do an install of the Apparmor utils. And it tells you here, right, that it's gonna remove the Python 3 utils. Are you sure? And it's, you know, this app is written in Python, but because there's updated versions, so we're gonna say yes here to proceed. Y and then press enter. So when you do this part right here for step 20, make sure you press Y to proceed. Now we want to test it, so we are going to install web server packages. As you learned from the prior lab, your NGINX, this is on top of Apache too. So you basically gonna install the web server package and activate it. We wanted to see if it's gonna be able to detect it. Okay, Apparmor is gonna be able to track it. So we're gonna install NGINX. And then again, press Y to continue. Now Apache comes default with Kali Linux with the Debian release, but if you want NGINX in place of just regular Apache 2, you can install it. And then once we have it installed, we're gonna start it. So we're gonna do a system. And if you don't have the privilege, you're just gonna make sure you do a sudo ctl start NGINX. And it's gonna prompt you this, so we're gonna type in our password. And if everything goes correctly, you should not see any kind of error there. So you would get another pop-up like that. And then step 26, what I want to do is I want to find my system address so I can plug it into the browser so that way I can see if it works or not, like if my web server works or not. So we can just do an IP address command. And that gives us the 10.0.2.15, which is here, right? The whole point in 26 is to verify that this IP is correct. Oops. Okay, so once I have the IP address and my server working, I can just run it directly in the terminal using Firefox command, or you can open this and then put in HTTP and the IP address. So it's easier if I just execute the command from here. And it's gonna try to open up, right? And everything works. So it tells me that it works. It loads my default DB and Apache to page. That means that my system is now a web server using NGINX package. So you can describe the web page that was loaded and then the screenshot for the loaded web page. So once that's done, we can close it, going back to our, and you can run it again if you want, right? Let's keep it running. And then we can minimize it and go back to the terminal or open another one. So I'll just open another one. So after we loaded the web page, we will proceed to 27, where we're going to look at the apparmor.d file, which we had modified earlier. And if we see the web server profile exists. So normally when you install and run an application, it's gonna link the application through the profile on Apparmor. So what we will do is we are going to go ahead and execute the list command. So now you don't see anything, right? There's no profile yet. Okay. What we'll do is we will proceed to the next step where we are going to create a profile for it. And what you do is when you do a double A like this, that's basically an Apparmor command. So you're gonna do a sudo aa-autodep nginx. So we're going to create a profile using this command. And then enter the password. So now it tells me that it created a profile and it is in USR bin and GNX. And you can see that it's similar to what you've seen in the past. So what we can do is we can also repeat the prior command and see now that it's there, right? See? Or we can also use a sudo cat and then access the usr.sbin.nginx because it creates that here. So when you run this, you're gonna see it would track like when that was activated or created. That's I had. Oh, I'm missing an R. Sorry. There's a typo on 29. Right here. Make sure you add that. Otherwise, it's gonna throw an error. Now, if you execute that correctly, it's gonna tell me that I last modified it at this time, right? So this is where SBIN. Now, what we'll do is now we already have a profile. So when you start, you number one, right? If you want to get it to be linked to your Linux kernel, you gotta update the bootloader. Then after that, you're gonna check its status. After you had checked the status and activated the services that you want to test, which is our web server, we are gonna look for the status and create a profile for it. Okay. Once you have the profile, now what you're gonna do is you're gonna tie that profile to the mode that it uses, right? Like whether we want to notify in case it violates the policy, whether we want to just like ignore and let it be, or other things. So you would have complaints where that would be set. Where was it? Yeah, complain, enforce, or confine. So we would be able to categorize this out now. So now what we'll do is we're going to set up the complaint. And now we have the mode activated for that profile, which is the web server application, the web server that we had set up, right? Then we are going to start it again. So we start the web server again. Now we're gonna go in and modify a few things. First, we're gonna edit the profile that we created a while back, a few steps ago. So we're gonna make sure that we use the text editor within the terminal by issuing nano. Oh, sorry, I had to copy more than it should. Control X. Okay. X. So sudo. Okay. It should give you the file. Oh, I'm missing another R here. See that? Make sure we check my typo. For 33. If you're getting some kind of funky. Yeah. So your file should not be empty. It should have like a few lines in it. And then you're going to use the arrow key. If you compare, right, we have ABI and then include tunable global, which is the same. And the location of NGINX, the flag that we had set. So what you can do is you can take all of this. You don't need to type that out, right? You can take this whole entire thing, copy it. Come back to your terminal. Use your arrow key to move down first to the last character and then just backspace everything out. And then I would want to get to that line. And then we're gonna right click and we're gonna paste the selection. And just double check and make sure that you have all the lines that you need. Once that happens, once I'm in Nano, right, I clear everything out in that file. I copy and paste the code, the command. Yeah, so you just move your arrow down to the last part and then just hit backspace key all the way up. Yeah. Clear everything out and then copy and paste it over to your file. So once that happens, you can scroll up and making sure that your file is good. So you just move your arrow key up to the top and making sure you have the entire script. Then once you have that, you're gonna do save. So Control X and then Y, yes, and then press enter to save the same file name. So what we did was we modified the profile, right, that we created previously. We did configure it a little bit earlier, but we change it up now through the text editor. Now what we'll do is we will create a folder or the directory so that way we can, for another profile. So what we can do is we can do a forbidden profile. And so in this case, what you do is you just make a folder for that. And then we will use the text editor and we are going to make an index file. So index file is the HTML file that is loaded when you visit the website, right? It's the default first file that you see, which is the first page content. So index file contains the page content. And for our file, because there's nothing for the index yet, you can just simply make a header saying forbidden access. Okay, copy and paste that. And then we're going to save it. Control X, yes, and enter. So this will be the page if they access the forbidden, and it's going to say forbidden access, right? Then what we'll do is we're going to load the profile using the parser. So and then once we have the profile loaded, we're going to enforce it. Okay. So earlier you saw that we had it under complain mode, right? Which is it just notify you. And then the enforce mode is now it's going to restrict. So what we'll do is we already activate the enforce mode. So at this point, we're going to screenshot and show that your mode is activated. And once that's enforced, we're going to reactivate our web server again. So we're going to start that again. And now what we're going to do is we are going to try to load that index file that you had created earlier, right? With the HTML here. We're going to try to load it. And if the system is doing its job, if Apparmor is doing its job, right, you should see the result there. So after I activated my web server, I'm going to go ahead and run the Firefox. But notice that I'm actually accessing my own system right? But in the forbidden index, remember that we had set the rule for that up here. So we wanted to see if that we can access it now, right? Bam, it worked. So you have the enforcement, so it works showing that your index file, right? Did the page load? Take a screenshot. Then what we'll do again is we're gonna go back and we're gonna edit the profile. So we want to allow log services to be activated as well. So we're gonna go ahead and modify the profile through your text editor again. So we're gonna close the screen, close this. So coming back here, we're just gonna go ahead and run this command to access Nano. And we're gonna move down to the section where it shows the ETC. So use your down arrow key and go all the way down to ETC, NGINX, NGINX / CONF, that's configuration. Okay. But don't mix them up. They have similarity. So you're going to do the conf arc, this one. So it's like the fourth one in that section. And we're gonna remove it. Backspace it out. Once that's done, we're going to save it. So Control X, press Y, and press Enter. All right. Now we're going to apply the changes, right? Just like before, we're going to apply the changes in the profile that we had modified. So we're going to parse it again. And then we're going to reload our web services. And it tells me that the service failed because the control process has exited error code, right? Let's try to see if I can just start instead of using restart. Same thing, right? So it tells me here that no, I cannot restart. And that's what you're supposed to have, is because we wanted to generate a log that your services failed. Because remember, we had removed, right, this. We had changed the configuration and we disallow, right, for our services. So did it restart? No, right? Then what we're gonna do is we are gonna use logprof to check the logging. So this is a logging utility. We will access it by using that. Okay. Well, I didn't want to take that. It should have come down with the util. Okay, it's okay if you don't have this working, that's fine. I gotta see why. When I tested it, it should be okay. But, all right. So if you're not able to do the log prop, that's all right. You can screenshot that anyway. And then what we're gonna do is we are going to check the status for our web server. Why it's failed to start. And you should see, right? It tracks that here. Remember that there's a control process exit. So it was working before, and then now, right? It should say it tracks that the service failed. So why did it fail? Right? We put in the enforcement we block it basically through our Apparmor. And so with that, Apparmor is effective, right? It's working. Even if we have the services installed, we cannot launch it. So that's the whole point, is you wanted to control it where even if the user is able to install it, they cannot activate that service. That's the point. So here what you see is because we had it on the kernel module, this is something that you would see for the, it's not, it's a little bit different than what you see where it's just an application to filter or block, right? To deny. It access the Linux kernel or the OS kernel, and then it's able to manage the application, which sometimes utilize the what do they call that? That controls the hardware level, right, through the operating system itself. So when you have it deny, it should generate some kind of event logs. So what we want is we want to maybe look at journal logs, because earlier, if you're not able to do log proc, yeah, I gotta see why it's not loading. But we can also look at other types of log here. So what you can do is you can do a sudo journal CTL. And just press, sorry. Put in your password. So this gives you more information about the log. Okay. So when you're looking at it, right, earlier I tried to execute the installation for logproc, right, but it couldn't pull it. And then I checked the status of my web server, and what you see is that it would tell you who did it, at what level, and what time. So this provide you with like the session log information. Okay, take a screenshot. And it should tell you whether it's allowed or denied, and the timestamp. Then we can do Control C. Let me go back a little bit. So on mine, it doesn't show. Shows this. It's busy. Only able to print right, but it's not letting me see other things. Okay. Yeah, that's what you're supposed to see. Earlier, it was skimming out on me on the. So if you're not sure, you can just restart the NGI and CX and see, because every time that it denies, um, it's going to log that information. So it tells me, right, my status. I ran the status, and then the session opened, the user root. Um, so it deactivated the PHP session because PHP is part of the web server. Whenever that you load Apache, that page that you see, it added that service on there. So it also stopped the other services that's also included with that. Um, and then, so you can try like to set it up. So the whole point in this is what did you really do, right? After you had installed this Apparmor, you have to make a profile for that specific application to work. Then you're going to go into that profile and you need to set it up, right? So we basically set up where we want to, uh, we modify the profile and then activate that profile again. And you can have it to either complain, enforce, or just ignore, right? So ultimately it's restrict, notify you when that happens. So the alarm sounds off is a complaint. The restriction is where you enforce the rule, right? And then if you don't want to do anything, that will be the third option. So once that happens, you can activate it, you can enforce the rule, and then you can try to run the service again. Okay. So if the service is not working, then it's doing its job. But if the service is working, like if I go right here, open up my Firefox, and I attempt to visit 10.0.2.15, right? This page is loaded, but for the local host, if we want to go to the forbidden page, it should not work, because remember that you didn't lock this down. You locked down the forbidden extension to the web page. Because in a web application, each of your tab is a different area of that particular web server. You know that, right? So if I click on payments, that's a separate component of that web app. So when you control the web application, you got to control each of the feature on that application. Let's say that I disallow, a certain tab on the application, then you need to enforce it this way. So remember that when we change this, we change it for the forbidden, right? So when you try to access it, let's see. Yeah, see how it's supervising. So when you open activity, it shows your processes and how it's open, it's running, the type of applications. Let's see. We enforce it here, and then oh, I meant to go here. Yeah. So now it's not loading my forbidden page anymore, see? Because we modified it already. But earlier we did, you saw that happens earlier. So your web services is now not effective. Because it's not even loading the index page that we created. Because earlier it should say your web page here should say forbidden access. But it's not showing that because that component of my web server is not active anymore. Okay. So that's how you can control it. Make a profile, enforce that profile, or create. So when you create a profile, you can create it for a certain mode. Complain, enforce, right? Or the other one is just for ignore. Now, once you enforce it, you want to also track it through the logs. I gotta see why log prop doesn't work, which is weird because maybe it didn't come down. I tested it. Yeah. So I'm gonna check something quick. It says that it cannot find the directory, right? Cannot find, oh, can't find system log. Please check permissions. Yeah, so it's just disallowing me because I'm not at the root level. Or it's not able to access the log, but it should be working. Okay. So that means that it already applied the mandatory access control. So regardless, even if I have a pseudo component in here, remember, I'm not able to access that particular directory for the syslog. Now, I have to probably go in a different way but for the application itself, it's just saying that I don't have the permission to do that. So it does apply mandatory access control in that sense. Okay. Okay. So for the last question, just answer, what did you learn when you're doing the lab? How can you use Apparmor for security task. Definitely a useful tool. I think if you search SE Linux, it usually would come up because it is now implemented across all the Linux releases. There is another one that is not as popular, but this is how you're able to test it. So we just test it with the web server feature, but you can use it for different application purposes. Okay. All right, let me stop recording.